Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode from Ampro Engineering. In this episode, we're going to take one of my favorite chassis, the Tamiya TA02, and we are going to do some what I believe are essential upgrades to it. Now, before we get started, I just want everybody to know that nothing that we talk about in this episode is critical. If you have a standard TA02, and that's all you can afford, then it is perfectly fine the way it is. What we're going to talk about here are things that I have discovered that have made the chassis better, but oftentimes people think what I'm saying is you can't drive the car unless you do this upgrade, and that is not the case. So moving on, I have had a TA02 since it was brand new. I had the TA02 RS David June edition. I've had it for probably going on 25 years now. And with that said, I'm pretty gentle to my cars, but I've found a lot of problems with not only that one, subsequent ones that I've purchased along the way. However, before I get to any of the fragility, I have to get into the biggest problem with not just the TA02, but practically every single thing that is run off of the Tamiya line, and that is slop. It is absolutely commonplace to have pivot arms and bell cranks and knuckles and servo savers out of the box have 5, 10, 15 degrees of slop. And that is just a pain in the butt. So one of the greatest upgrades I've ever done on both my TA02 as well as my FF01, and the same is true with the TA01, is a updated ball bearing metal bell crank kit. This is the one that I've picked up. You can see this one is from Jazz Rider, but there's all kinds of different variations. But what they share is a complete lack of instructions. What I'm going to do is show you how to install this, and if you stop the video when we're done with that, you will have seen by far the most important upgrade on your TA01, TA02, and FF01 chassis. It's possible these fit other Tamiya chassis, but in my experience, they have completely transformed the driving dynamic by reducing the amount of play dramatically. First thing you want to do is take off the entire front bulkhead. There are, I believe, 3 screws here on the top. That one's missing apparently, and those are missing also. Win-win. There we go. And next we'll take off, look at all this slop in here. This is actually a used chassis, but I mean, this isn't correct. Someone's not assembled this properly, I believe, or it's just loose. Yeah, I think that's just loose. So pull all this stuff off like so. Yeah, this is the correct screw. It's supposed to be this shank style self-tapping screw. The one that was on the other side is a self-tapping screw. So before you blame Tamiya for slop, make sure you have the right hardware. It seems no matter how many of these I install, I never remember how to do it. So it's always good to take your car that already has it and use it as a template. And here my beloved FF01 already has that steering setup. So let's take a look at it. So there are these, again, it's a little bit dusty here. What we're going to want to do is install the M3 ball studs here on the back on top, as well as on the bottom. And you want to do it for both sides, and I'll show you how that works. Beautifully anodized aluminum pieces. So there are some bearings, a few brass bushings, and a few seated brass bushings, and then we have some M3 machine thread screws. But right now we're going to focus just on these guys. They will be installed in this orientation, looking at the top of the car with the front that way. So we'll take our ball studs that we removed from the car. You're going to want to use a bit of blue thread lock on these parts. Never use red, and that is more than enough. Red is a permanent thread lock, so we'll thread this in here. You do not want to over torque this because the orange part is aluminum and it will not survive being overly tightened. A bit of thread lock makes that perfect. So we'll do that there. One here on the bottom and same on this. All right, next we will address this connecting arm right here. To do that, flip this arm over and we'll drop in this little brass bushing here with the tapered seat for this flathead Allen screw. Okay, you see that there? Again, a dab of blue thread lock right there. And then we'll install this with the boss side downward like this. If you flip it around, it'll bind. So that is how that looks. We'll do the same on this side by flipping this down, dropping in our tapered bushing, our flathead Allen screw, and threading that on in there with a bit of thread lock. Next, we'll deal with the bearing mounting here and here. You want to grab one of the bearings, pop it in there, flip this over, and install that bearing. You want to do the same to this side. Then go ahead and drop in these little brass sleeves. Flip it over, put your hands underneath so that you can make sure they don't fall out, and install them on the bottom as well. Now here's the part a lot of people mess up on. You're given these machine screws to install here. The problem is, on this car, since it was used, it already had threads for a self-tapping screw. And if you install a machine screw, yeah, you can probably get it in there, but you're going to damage the existing threads. And again, this is a ABS tub, and they don't like to be cross-threaded. So my recommendation is to use a self-tapping screw once again. So having that sit there, we'll install our self-tapping screw. If your car is brand new and has never had anything threaded in, then by all means, use the machine screw. So we'll do a couple of these. Back thread, of course, to prevent them from cross-threading. There it goes. And this can be snugged down because the bearing will prevent them from... Now, there's no way to over-tighten these. Well, hang on a second. Let me clarify that. It's not possible to tighten the bearing and have it so that these won't turn because you've got that brass sleeve. However, if you over torque the screw, what you're going to do is strip out the tub. So when the screws stop, let them be. You also do not want to use thread lock between the screw and the plastic, at least the blue thread lock. You don't want to use this. This is not intended for this application. They do make plastic thread locks. They're kind of hard to get your hands on. So if you do feel like you need some additional help bonding these together, my recommendation is to get a fairly weak liquid cement. Now, it's not designed for this application, but what I found is that it gums up the threads a little bit and makes it so that they don't want to back out nearly as easily. And that's always worked really well for me. If you've got a better suggestion, please let me know in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the links. And that is done. Let's reinstall the bulkhead. And this time I'll use some screws. I like to use these Kimbrough Products servo savers. You can find these on eBay for very, very little money. I think these are like $6 each, and there is nearly no play. The movement that you're seeing here is the servo. So they're really, really good, and they replaced the Tamiya one, which has a ton of slop. So that will go in there. Make sure that you do center everything. The ball stud has to go on the back side. In fact, I'm looking at this carefully here, and I'm pretty certain this is a ball stud. Yes, this is a ball stud for a RC10. So let me go ahead and pull that out, and then we'll mount to the servo. Servo saver is in. Go ahead and clip that into place. Flip that over. This is roughly the length it has to be. We're going to make that more accurate when the car's put together, but all right, and there we have it. These hubs on this car are brand new, and the reason for that is the last ones were split here and here. That seems to be where they all crack. For these, I went ahead and tapped these with an M3 tap, and that should make them last a lot longer. However, on the Mondeo over here, we have a black one on this side and a blue one on this side here, and they're both broken. So we're going to ditch those in favor of these aluminum units. So these were insanely cheap on eBay. I want to say they were like $7. I wouldn't call these necessary for the TA02. In fact, if you're going to run yours kind of hard, it's better to have the plastic ones because you want to minimize broken parts as much as possible. And if you have these in metal or aluminum, what may happen in a hard impact is you bend these and break your arm. What you want is to really focus the stress on one more sacrificial part. But on this car, its days of racing are over, so we're going to replace that. Nothing all that special here. On this car, it has the standard shank style machined screws, as you can see that. Tamiya also made a variant that was a hex head, and I believe those are for the high performance models. I don't know if they're made out of aluminum, but if your car does have those, again, remember that you don't want to torque these down too much because you are going to strip out these here if you over torque them. Pop that off. Okay, orient them in the same orientation and pull off the ball stud. Glue, again, use a bit of thread lock. We've got our bearings placed on the outside and on the inside. Our ball stud is installed. Flipping this over, we'll put a bit of thread lock in there and on the bottom and install it like the stock one. And there we have it. Fitment was perfect. The threads were nicely tapped. No sharp edges or burrs. This was a very, very finely made product. They're no name, and again, they're on eBay, so you just have to search it. There are no links because if I put a link up, it'll be probably dead in a week. So just search on eBay for these aluminum parts. Comically, as I was talking, I noticed that's broken. Those are all just junk anymore, and I happen to have these aluminum ones in silver also. Is that going to fit? Yes? No? Oh, wait, you know what? This came with its own pins. These cheap hex adapters came with these little pins that are a bit small. I honestly don't have that much faith that these are going to work that well. In fact, I just noticed another problem. These don't fit over the axle, so I'm going to have to bore those out. That's a bummer. Now, they weren't necessarily for a Tamiya. They were just some random eBay hexes. So temporarily, we'll just slap this broken one back on and be done with it for now. We'll address these in a future video. Now that the Mondeo is upgraded, let's continue on with this chassis here. And that is going to be with a motor heatsink. Now, these are available in a bunch of different variations. This one here is GPM. I got this at a really good price. Usually they're kind of expensive, but you can also get them from Jazz Rider as well and some no-name brands. But basically, the motor right now is mounted to a plastic plate, which let's go ahead and pull it out and show you. And that plastic plate doesn't allow for much or if any heat dissipation. There's supposed to be a fiberglass spacer that is sitting on top of it, and I don't know if it's in this car. Okay, so look in here. This has a... Hey, where's the pinion? This has no pinion? Son of a... Hello, Mr. Pinion. Anyway, this part here is plastic, and then there's a... Goodbye, Mr. Pinion. There is a composite spacer in here, and that isolates the heat from the motor from damaging the plastic motor adapter. The problem is that means that any heat from the motor really doesn't get any dissipation. So this helps. How much does it help? It helps. This one here has these little standoffs that will drop in there, and you have the little flathead screws that go in there. So again, put a dab of blue thread lock on there and put one there and one there. So that is what you will have. You want to set this to, oh, it has no numbers on it. I have seen them that do show the numbers. So I want this set to the original. Let's see here. It's going to be that orientation there. You can see that this standoff and that standoff are very close to that through hole. Yeah, so that's what we'll do there. Now here's something interesting. Here you have the chamfered holes for a flathead screw, but these only came with, right? Oh, no, there's more here. There's more there. Now I should have mentioned this earlier. The shorter of the flathead screws go in the standoffs, and the slightly longer ones go into the motor. So before you put that on, make sure you do install the pinion. There we go. Compare where it was before. Ooh, I've already messed this up, haven't I? Now install it the exact same way you typically would. Straight on in there. And use the supplied M3 button head screws. You also may want to throw in a couple of washers like I did, just for a little bit more dispersal of the stresses in there. Now just note that it's not necessary to put thread lock on these, even though they are tapping into aluminum, because as you tighten these down, you slightly compress the ABS plastic, and that compression is enough to push back on the screw and, you know, make them not want to vibrate out. So there's our motor. While we're dealing with the motor, I'm going to show you something else that has annoyed me for years. My TA02 RS had a drive shaft connecting the rear gearbox to the front gearbox, and it was bent. So here's what these cars come with. You have two variations. You have the stock one over here, which is, you know, a thing. I don't know which one. No, this one didn't come with that. This one was on this car. This one I think was on, oh man, I don't know which. Well, anyway, this is on one of the cars. This one here is the one that I believe, yeah, it came on this car here. This is better, but they both tend to bend. I don't like either of these, so we're going to install this one here. Now, you may have noticed that this car doesn't actually have its front output shafts, and that is because it is currently running two-wheel drive. However, I change that back and forth depending on what body the car has. So we're going to install this nonetheless, and I'll show you how to do it. These are really, really straightforward. Pull off the top of the front gearbox. There are 3 screws. Go ahead and take out this bevel gear, remove the little bearing, remove the big bearing, and you have to do that, you got to pull off this C-clip. All right, so you got that off, and just go ahead and replace that with that. This did come with its own C-clips, so we'll put this in here. Put our bevel gear back on. Reinstall our small 5x8 bearing. And drop it right back into the car. And put the gearbox back together. At the rear, there are 1, 2, and 3 screws. Remove the gearbox cover and you'll see the exact same order of operations in here. Just pull all these apart. And reinstall those 3 screws. Don't forget to install the drive shaft. And again, in my case, I'm not currently going to run 4-wheel drive. Note that you have to cut off this little standoff here, otherwise the drive shaft is going to rub on it. The last thing this car is going to get are upgraded front and rear shock towers. Why? Well, let me show you. That is a crack. That right there is a crack. That's just what they do. These shock towers break. I do not have a single TA02 that has been run that has good shock towers. Now, I have one brand new one that I'm not done with the build yet. Those shock towers aren't broken because I never installed them. It is not worth my time to deal with this junk when I can simply replace it with a significantly superior part that is inexpensive and will last an eternity. So we'll pull these shocks off just like that. Keep that washer. Okay, we've got 1 screw here, which we're going to reuse. Another screw here, and pull this off as well. Don't forget that there is a washer between the shock tower and the upper link here. Okay. We'll replace that with the front one right here from also Jazz Rider. Every TA02 has this part in differing colors, except for one. My RS has an older version. It was a flat machined piece of aluminum, which worked fine, but you had to install all these weird standoffs and stuff, so it really wasn't worth it. Those are a lot older than these are. Here is the hardware that you get. You have 4 M3 machine screws, 2 sleeves, and 2 washers. We may use more of these washers. Where do they go? Don't know. Let's figure that out. So looking back at the front of the car, I do know that this goes right here. I wonder what that center threaded screw is for. Didn't occur to me, but the stock shock tower has that as well. That goes in there. So down here, what you can't see is I've wedged a washer back in there, and we'll use the exact same shank style screw that we removed and shove it right back in the hole. For the top, we're going to use the sleeve that it came with, slip that through the upper shock mount, put the O-ring right back over there. I added a washer because I think that would be helpful, and thread that right in place. There we go. For the body mounts, we'll use the other M3 screws that they came with and just slot those right on in. And now moving on to the rear, we've got the back one. This is just about as straightforward as the front shock tower. So let's go ahead and pull the rear one off. The rear one will be removed by taking off these two main bulkhead mounts. You've got the upper shock mounts, and then you've got the upper link mounts right there. We'll just drop that right back in where it belonged and use the exact same self-tapping screws to hold it in place. So for the upper link or control arm, we'll do the same as before. We're going to run our washer in between the two somehow, and then use that exact same shank self-tapping screw and hold the whole thing together. To install the upper shock mount, we'll use the hardware that came off of the car. In fact, I'll even use the same. Can I? Oh no, I can't. Oh yeah, wait. Oh my goodness. We're going to have to use the little metal retaining pieces here on the back. I wasn't aware of that. So these are what is already on your TA02. So we'll just slot that directly in the back and thread that in. That's all in. All that's left now is the shock towers, and for those, we'll use the supplied M3 screws. And as I'm going to make a Fiat 124 Estate or station wagon, I'm going to install my custom 3D printed rear body mounts, which are much, much taller. Well, folks, that is just about that. This may seem excessive, but I'm just showing you exactly what I do to every single TA02 I have. And since I've done that, the cars have been utterly just reliable. All the things that I've installed have been very necessary for me. By far, the most useful thing is this steering link upgrade. It is significantly reduces the amount of play you can see here in the front knuckle, and it is really worth its weight in gold. Very, very inexpensive as well. I've got a build that's coming up, which will be really, really cool on this chassis. So please stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this. And again, if you are looking for any of these parts, I wish I could give you links, but they're all on eBay and those sellers change constantly. So the best I can say is search for TA02, aluminum, and all of these things will come up. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.